Hello everybody, so welcome back to another video which I hope will help you better understand some of the best furniture from the past, such as this early 1830s piece by one of the most celebrated names in furniture history, the Bellangé firm, which notably furnished the White House in 1817. Now this piece is fresh out of its crate where it was hibernating for quite some time, and it turns out I'll be delivering it tomorrow, so here we are with an impromptu shoot to preserve this piece online in my final 24 hours with it. Now, part of why I think this is relevant is not only the quality of the piece, the signature of the maker, but also because another commode by Bellangé's son, the son of the man who furnished the White House, Louis-Alexandre, well, another one of these pieces is on display in the Paris Museum of Decorative Arts, the northwest wing of the Louvre. Now, that one is from the following decade, whereas this one is more to the tune of the early 1830s. Nevertheless, these are very rare and special pieces, and studying their qualities will help you discern between general antiques and then these early pre-industrial works of art. For the record, the gilt-wood chairs that the Bellangé firm delivered to the White House in 1817 are still on display there, along with some pier tables. They underwent massive conservation coming up on 10 years ago. And although this really is a work of art, and it's something that very few people would have had at the time, we could still categorize this as domestic because it retains a semblance of practical comfort, something to the tune of true furniture that a different type of even finer furniture loses. That stuff is qualified as meubles d'apparat in French, or appearance showpieces. They were almost purely for their presentation value, and you would rarely see them outside of official government buildings. So this Louis-Alexandre was one of the top suppliers during the reigns of King Charles X and Louis-Philippe, so the 1820s to the 1840s. Now the father, in addition to the White House anecdote, Father Bellangé was one of the most important suppliers to Napoleon. In fact, if you'd like, we could take a look back at a stunning bed in the manner of antiquity, which was made by Pierre-Antoine Bellangé, featured extensively in a previous video. So anyway, despite all of this wonderful work and prestigious commissions, both father and son Bellangé faced consistent financial difficulties throughout their careers. Yet here we are, still talking about their wonderful creations today. Now, this brief discussion of the Bellangé firm comes from the landmark work of curator Sylvain Cordier at the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts. He wrote this wonderful book about Bellangé. My copy of it is in France, but it's something that I strongly recommend for anyone interested in traditional French furniture. There's also an essay available online about the Bellangé album that he wrote as well. So what does Sylvain Cordier tell us that the younger Louis-Alexandre Bellangé was doing before he made or oversaw the workshop making this piece in around 1832? Well, in 1820, he began working alongside his father with some sort of an arrangement to have 3.5% of the profits. Seems a little low. And then in 1825, he succeeds his father as head of the workshop under the title of fournisseur breveté, which is like patented furniture, official furniture to the crown. In 1832, that title was renamed ébéniste du roi, ébéniste coming from ebony wood, or the first fine wood that was used as veneers on these works of veneer art. So he was the veneer artist, if you will, of the king. That is beautifully engraved in the lock here. So like his father, Louis-Alexandre went on to create exceedingly fine furniture, which he supplied to many of the royal palaces and museums. Among important commissions would be pieces delivered to the palaces and the chateaux of Trianon, Saint-Cloud, Fontainebleau, and Pau in the south of France, as well as the Tuileries Palace, which of course burned later on in the 19th century. He also supplied pieces to various museums which were administered by the royal household at the time. An example would be a set of benches delivered to the Antiquities Museum of the Louvre. He also delivered pieces to the Museum of Versailles, which opened in 1837. Now, Louis-Alexandre was also an award-winning exhibitor at the expositions of products of French industry. What on earth were those, you must be asking? Well, those were the exclusive precursors to the World's Fairs, which began in 1851. So like a World's Fair, but harder to get into and arguably with better stuff. In 1827, in 1834, and in 1839, Louis-Alexandre was awarded the silver medal at these Paris exhibitions of French industry, the Exposition des produits de l'industrie française. Now, interestingly, synchronistically, if you will, in 1834 he was awarded that silver medal alongside the furniture maker Jean-Christophe Fischer, who made the wonderful transforming mechanical desk that we saw in a previous video and which was later acquired by the Nelson Atkins Museum of Art here in Kansas City. I'm trying to get the point across that pieces such as this really have little to do with what we generally call an antique in everyday speech. And as I said, despite all of this success, there were financial problems going on the whole time, such that the firm went bankrupt in 1831, managed to reopen in 1832, talk about how everything is darkest before the dawn, because in 1832 he ended up receiving this honorary title of furniture maker to the king. So it's great that he got it all together. Nevertheless, things went to hell in a handbasket around 1840, and he was forced to retire on the eve of 1844, according to Sylvain Cordier's research and scholarship. Later, he went to Mexico, Louis-Alexandre did, to take part in some sort of silver mining venture with his brother, was a chemist down in Mexico. And so he had a little south of the border experience before that didn't work out, and he came back to France after 1851, where they lived outside of Paris in Maison-sur-Seine briefly, before returning to Paris, where Louis-Alexandre Bellangé perished, died in June of 1861. With that out of the way, this is a particularly well-drawn piece, and it shows us a very masterful but somewhat discreet luxury. At a glance, it reminds us of the typical and by no means rare Louis-Philippe commodes of this time, which are often in flame mahogany and which have exposed drawers across the facade. Upon inspection, though, this one is far more sophisticated. Firstly, it stands out by its proportions. It's about 20% larger than these aforementioned typical Louis-Philippe commodes. Secondly, it is topped with a very special white Carrara marble, which is adorned with these lines here, these gorges. It's a marble à trois gorges, as they call it. This is just a rule of thumb, but in general, that's an indication of a piece being a little bit finer to see those added lines. Also, this is what's called in French a commode à vantaux, or a doored commode, sometimes also called a commode à l'anglaise, an English commode. And the ones with these doors that conceal the inner drawers are about 10 times rarer than the ones that have drawers fitted directly into the facade. In addition, this one has a rarer mottled speckled variety of mahogany veneer, which is gracefully and subtly adorned with these Greek key borders that you can see over there in a darker wood. Perhaps it's ebony wood, maybe it's amaranth. But in any case, this inlay work is kind of a vestige of the hyper-precise inlay work that we're going to see in the previous decade during the true Charles X style. So this could perhaps be qualified as a Charles X, Louis-Philippe transitional type of piece. Very successful inlays, I would say, for something of this sort of sober variety in decor. So I might be lucky to have one or two more of these in my entire career, to have a commode that is signed by Bellangé. So pieces like this from a relatively late moment in the traditional timeline of decorative arts account for why Christopher Paine wrote in his book about the 19th century luxury Parisian furniture market that pieces of the 1830s deserve a little bit more attention. Now, this period was overlooked due to the abundance of important earlier work, but also due to this period's proximity with the onset of industrialization, which really turned the paradigm of creation, artistic creation in previous periods, into something that was more of a commercial paradigm. It's always a question of separating the wheat from the chaff, but in the 19th century there is a bit more chaff out there because they were able to produce so much more furniture, especially in the later part of the 19th century. So even though the piece is a bit late, its execution is really tethered to an earlier 18th century or early 19th century paradigm of art furniture. And stylistically, we're dealing with something that's still rather pure here. Very straightforward. Greek key borders and straight lines. Those are simple designs that remind us of ancient Roman art, antiquity. There's a touch of incoherence on this piece, announcing the stylistic pastiche and confusion which dominates furniture of the 1840s. And that is the presence of this stylistically opposite Gothic inlay around the main drawer's key. Two hearts. That makes no sense because classicism is derived from the ancient republics, antiquity, and the Gothic style is sort of a European medieval style. So we're starting to get into dangerous territory aesthetically as we see this mixing of opposing styles on the same piece. But here I find it just kind of historically interesting because it's such a great way to date this piece. We're at the absolute end of the standard French neoclassicism. Even the Bellangé Commode in the Paris Museum of Decorative Arts, it's not stylistically pure anymore. They've entered a mixture of pastiche and revival and reinterpretations of different opposing styles from history, and they throw them all together in a new way that's often striking. But do these things really go together? I'm not sure. Okay, so that's the next big criticism of 19th century furniture. If you want to get into that discussion of 19th century furniture and what types of it from which decades are better or perhaps more valuable and why it was criticized or why it wasn't, I did get into that in a long video about a pair of Jacob-signed chairs that I'll link at the end of this video. I hope I've shown you good enough B-roll here to really see the beautiful speckling on the sides and these thin little moldings here that complement the inlay of the facade. Now we might as well take a look at the back of the piece here for the furniture people that like to see these sorts of things. I also had the marble off at some point, so I suppose we ought to pan over that and take a look at some of these assemblages, the joinery. It's always fun to look at the hidden parts of the piece, and in many ways I'm always surprised at how good the pieces look inside because they've been closed up and nothing's really oxidized. Actually, this piece is basically in mint condition. I have done nothing to it other than I have polished the French polish with the French polish cleaner. Okay. Now, one thing to mention too, generally with pieces like this that are approaching 200 years old, we have to understand that these aren't going to behave like pieces made yesterday. And so one of the things that's happened here is this door has ever so slightly warped. It's a little unfortunate, and I don't think it's worth it to ship it off and have the whole thing dismantled and all the different veneers unglued and then press it. What you do in that case is you accept that the piece is almost 200 years old, and special gestures are going to be required to deal with it, such as applying an uncomfortable amount of pressure here before locking that key, in which case they stay closed. But it kind of pops open because there's a little bit of pressure there. However, I've had it locked inside of its crate for however long it's been hibernating, and the doors don't seem to have cracked or have bent, and it didn't seem to stress the lock any, so I think through trial and error, it's okay to put the doors through that little bit of extra stress that the centuries have demanded. Now, this lock still really pops. It hasn't really been used much, I imagine. Certainly it was in a home with many, many rooms and was probably owned by people who had several properties, so you don't end up using a piece as much as you would a typical bedroom chest of drawers today. You'll see pieces like this represented in period watercolors in the living room, the salon, the dining room, as well as different bedrooms. So this is a very versatile piece. It's a commode in French, which simply means handy. It's a handy decorative side table, which is handy because it has drawers, as opposed to a side table that does not have drawers, which would be far less handy, I assure you. And this is a type of one that you might not recognize as much as, say, this commode from 85 years earlier. Now, this one is Southern French, but it's an emblematic French commode table with the drawers accessible directly in the facade of the piece. And that commode table really showcases the triumph of the sculptor. It is not a work of veneer art, as is this piece. And if you would like to learn more about that subject, there is an extensive video on French commode tables of the 18th century, 50 or 60 videos ago on the channel. And what on earth is this jarring vertical split straight down the middle of the side? How could that have happened? That happened because the two pieces of veneer here that were matched to form the side, well, they're divided straight down the middle, and so over time that little separation has come apart. a couple of millimeters. The same thing did not happen on that side, but on this side you can see where the line is, and for whatever reason the separation only happened over here, but that is really just a charming sign of the age of the piece. And I'd like to congratulate myself on not losing this key, which the piece has had for almost 200 years, but it's quite cool. Like, see, this one is probably not the original key. I think this is a bullshit key that was made later because they lost the other key. But whatever, at least there are keys. So after all of that, I really think that the Bellangé firm is responsible for some of the most beautiful items, articles for the home ever made. And I do hope that you've enjoyed the video. Please leave a comment if this has roused you in some way, this subtle late Bellangé piece. Leave a scathing criticism, whatever you would like. Any participation in the channel is much appreciated, and I'll see you at the next video. Thanks.